Welcome to EPH 456 Bible Study, where we seek to understand the truth. In John 17:17, Jesus said, "Thy word is truth." This week, we will be starting a new series on the book of Job. Hope you enjoy. 702. Man, it's kind of hard to put this coffee down, I gotta say. Let me move that over here right quick. All right, so we have a very interesting lesson tonight. Upon your request, you wanted to go through this book. Very, very interesting book. I'm excited, and hopefully we both will learn something as we go through it. So with that, we'll go ahead. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for another Wednesday. We thank you for life, health, and strength. We thank you for allowing us to come together and learn about you again. We ask that you would just open up our hearts and our minds to receive what you have for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so interesting book, Joe. Very, very interesting book. A lot of different takes on it. So the way this is going to go is, rather than just jump right into Job, I like to give you the contextual history so you're understanding what you're listening to or what we're studying. If I didn't give you this background, then it doesn't, well, I will say it like this. It helps you put the pieces together when you understand what point in history you're at, geographic location, what type of issues that they were looking at addressing, rather than just reading it and listen and understanding the words, which is great, but understanding the why is, to me, just as important and sometimes more important. So, Job Part 1, we're going to get through as much as we can today. It is a verse-on-verse study, so we'll be reading Job, and I'll be explaining it as we go along, similar to the format we did with Ruth. But before we get to that part, we're going to talk about the book of Job fundamentals and some background on Job. So, first fun fact is the book of Job is suspected to be one of the oldest, if not the oldest book in the Bible. So you guys are kind of going, wait a minute, how is that possible? Genesis is the oldest book in the Bible. Well, not necessarily. Genesis talks about the earliest times, the beginning of time, whereas Job obviously does not. But as far as the time in which the books existed, Job is possibly the oldest book, which is interesting. I find that very interesting because it goes against what is common traditional belief. But again, it's just suspected. It's not verified. The fact of the matter is no one really knows when Job was written. There's a few different thoughts on it. The period of Job that Job is addressing, or the time that Job would have existed, is suspected to be around the patriarchal age. So just so we're all on the same page here, the patriarchal age is Abraham's time frame. So it would have been around the time of Abraham, before the law, right? So before the law was given by the word of God to the hand of Moses. So before all of that, Job would have existed. So part of the basis for this thinking is Job doesn't mention anything about the law. Nothing about it. Nothing about any aspects of the law. And what's interesting is most scholars would conclude that because of the topics that Job's covers with dealing with adversity, which obviously we'll get into as we go along, it would have been impossible to cover these items without mentioning the law or the principles within the law. So things like Job 9, where he says, how can a man be justified before God? So they're thinking that he wouldn't have asked it that way. He would have said it or mentioned the law at least when that statement was made. So that's the thinking. The other reasons for dating the story around the time of Abraham is, or in that patriarchal time period, is because when you look at the wealth that we're going to talk about in Job chapter 1, it talks about how wealthy he was. It measures wealth in livestock, right? It says he has, 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels, or, what I mean? That explains how rich a person would have been. And it's very, very similar to what we see in Genesis when Abraham and Jacob, I think Isaac as well, but I know Abraham and Jacob, when their wealth is described, he had X amount of goats or X amount of sheep or whatever the case may be. So because of the way that their wealth is phrased in the categories of livestock, people think that the writing is around that age. And then one of the other reasonings is because when a small piece of the in the beginning of Job, where some things happen to his family, they describe the folks who raided Job's house, and we'll hopefully get through that piece today. They describe them as nomadic marauders, which would have been a term that was commonly used during that time period. And really only that time period, because they wouldn't have used that term later on. So gives you an idea on when Job was written, which I thought was some pretty fun facts. Now, interesting enough, the author of Job is also unknown. None of us can say for sure who wrote it. So some of the candidates for authorship would be Moses, Solomon, Isaiah possibly, Elihu, who is Job's friend, which we'll talk about him as we go through, or even Job himself. But again, fact is, nobody knows who wrote the book. Again, at the time of writing, there's no consistency about it. The other thought process I told you about the time of Abraham, the other thought process is that, Solomon wrote it, and it would have been, in his time when the wisdom literature, like, the Song of Solomon, Proverbs, which those poetry books would have been written. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit. The other thing is in the book, it talks about things like iron tools or iron weapons, and that implies that the book would have been written during that Iron Age. So, which would have been around 1200 BC or so. Early. And again, there's also sections within Job that talk about a mounted war horse, which describes a military weapon that was used around the 10th or 12th century BC. So all of these factors, when you consider all of them, they've narrowed it down. Either Solomon wrote it, or it was written a lot earlier than that, and it was either Moses or Job himself. So interesting about the authorship. So next thing, where does this story happen? So the location of the events of Job happens in a land called Uz, U-Z. So where is Uz? Nobody knows. Nobody knows for sure. However, when you're reading Job and it talks about, and it does give some geographic clues to where Uz might have been, the text states that Job was one of the greatest people of the East. So when they use the terminology people of the East, they would mean east of the Jordan River. So that would have meant that would have placed Job in Syria or possibly even northwest Mesopotamia. So another interesting piece about where Uz is, per se, is there's a connection between Job and the line of the Edomites. So if you guys recall, when we were talking about Ruth a little bit, we touched on it. So the Edomites, just as a reminder, were the children of Esau, which is Isaac's firstborn, okay? And the reason why they say that it could have been around that Edom area is because there's many names in the book of Job that also occurred during the genealogy of Esau. So there is a possibility that Job could have been around that area, or Uz could have been around that area. So these are all of the unique features of the book that scholars have looked at through the years to try to date it, to try to put understand where these events happen. The other thing is that this entire book happens within a year. Most scholars are that's the consensus of it. So some other book aspects. So Job, as I stated before, was the first in the line of the poetry books in the Bible. So for those of you guys who are not aware, the Bible is broken up into sections of books, okay? So, and you guys know this, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy is the Torah or the law or the Pentateuch, right? So those are the first 5 books. And after that, you get the history books. You get, 1st, 2nd Samuel, Kings, Chronicles. Those are all history books. And then you get to the poetry books. The poetry books are Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Those are all poetry books. And then you get to the prophets, which is where you get, Isaiah and Daniel and Jeremiah and Habakkuk and Hosea and Ezekiel and all of those. So the Bible, again, is broken up into these sections, and Job is the first of the poetry books in the Bible. Now, understanding we just went through Ruth, so contrasting a little bit with Ruth, Ruth had various layers as we went through, spent the last month on. Some were prophetic layers, which speaks to foreshadowing of things to come. Job really doesn't do that. His book doesn't have a lot of prophecy to it. Another contrast would be Ruth would give an example of commitment, faith, and those things, which are awesome things. Job, the book of Job, to me, is about showing that same commitment through extremely close adverse conditions. Job also provides insight of how to react to righteous criticism, which we will definitely go through that as we go through the book. But just a little foreshadowing of my own, if I can say that. If you poll Christians today regarding judging, if I said, okay, is judging okay? Is it all right to judge your neighbor? Half the Christians will say yes. The other half will say absolutely not. Bible says, judge not lest you be judged. Judge not lest you be judged. And you can find all that in Matthew 7, 1 through 5. I'm not going to read it, but you guys can get through that. But what you have to understand is that Matthew 7, 1 through 5 doesn't say not to judge. It teaches you how to judge. And literally the verses that follow that are instructions on how to, and by default, how not to judge. So judging, the term judging, is in fact criticism with a conclusion. So I'm criticizing you, telling you you did something wrong, or you did something right, or you're wearing something wrong, or you're, whatever the case may be. And I'm already drawing that conclusion. That's what essentially judging is. It's conclusion with communicated consequence, right? So I've already put you in this spot and I've judged you based on what your actions were. I observed your actions. I said that they aren't what they're supposed to be, and I've already aligned you in this spot. But the fact of the matter is, we regrow through criticism. It can be an extremely awesome positive to be criticized when it's done correctly. And reason being is because we can't see all ends, especially when you're in a situation. And criticism helps us identify our blind spots and potential weaknesses. So if you're telling me, okay, well, criticism is a good thing, but I don't understand what's the difference between, this and that. Well, the difference between good criticism and bad criticism is simply your motivation for criticizing that person and your communication with that person. So if I'm criticizing you and my interest is to get you to get out of whatever it is you're doing because it's going to hurt you or hurt your family, that's a good thing. And I'd be doing that out of love. So if I do that with love, that criticism is good. That judging is good. Something to think about. Again, if criticism is done, love in the interest of helping our brother or sister grow in Christ, it's a good thing. The book of Job is not that. It is not that. It's actually the opposite. It's a book of examples of how not to do what I just said. And you'll find that pretty interesting. As there's several examples of when you get to the back and forth and Job and his friends and the rebuttals and all of that, it's his friends assume that Job is being judged by God because of something he did. And they're kind of giving him the old righteous indignation deal and, the whole Bible beating deal, which I'm sure that all of us have experienced from one time or the other. And they assumed incorrectly. So Job does bring that aspect. It also has several unique mysteries. Job is actually it's a fascinating book because like Ruth, it has so many layers, but just different layers. So again, Job has several unique mysteries. The first is Job may be one of the very first examples that confirm that things that happen in the spiritual world affect things in the physical world. Meaning that things that go on in the spiritual world, you see the effects of that in the physical world. And Job, the book of Job, confirms that. Some people do overlook this part, but it's crucial to understand as it gives the foundation for this scripture, Ephesians 6:12, which is our first reading tonight. So I'm going to flip on over there right quick. Ephesians 6:12. You guys have heard this many times. But the book of Job gives the foundation for this. All right. It says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places." This book confirms that because the whole events of Job is as a result of something that happened in the spiritual realm. And we'll get into that. The second interesting aspect of it is Job provides us a very unique background of the heavenly realm. And if you just read the story of Job, you'll miss it. That's one reason why I'm taking so much time going through it, because it's key to understand this, because this is the foundation for a lot of other things that you will learn, especially in Revelation. See, that's part of the reason why we have a hard time understanding Revelation, is because our Old Testament game is weak. Job is part of understanding Revelation, if you can believe it. I'll prove it to you tonight. Okay? So, The second thing is understanding that there's a possible hierarchy of authority in heaven. You don't see that in barely any other book. That within the heavenly hosts, there are angels that are in charge of that have different dominions and different areas of responsibility that they're in charge for. And we're going to see that scene played out in Job 1:6 and Job 2:1. And they're fascinating. And when you take those two scenes and then you combine those with some stuff in Revelation we'll talk about, it's going to you're going to be like, wow, I can't believe that. That's amazing. So, outline of Job goes like this, really quick. There's a prologue. Then we get Job's perseverance on display. Then you get a poetic body, which consists of Job's initial monologue. Then there's these three cycles, right, of back and forth. So you have Eliphaz, he gives his speech. Then Job gives a response. Then Bildad gives his speech. And then Job responds to it. And then Zophar gives his speech. Job responds to Zophar, okay, and all of his friends. Then they do another round of that. And then they do a third round. And then after the third round, God enters the conversation with Job. And then Job briefly responds, and then God goes in again, and then the book concludes. So I'm trying to figure out how we're going to go through that piece of it. But that's essentially what the outline of Job is. So with that, we're going to start Job. Chapter 1, verse 1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. Also, his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household. You would have to have one to take care of all those animals. I mean, you got 11,000 animals there. So that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. And his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on his appointed day, and would send an invite to their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So it was, when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them, and would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did regularly. Okay, so really quick, couple quick highlights there. So we know Job's got 7 sons, 3 daughters. Got a lot of sheep, got a lot of camels, got a lot of oxen, donkeys, over 11,000 animals. Okay, so put the story into perspective. Imagine in your mind's eye 11,000 animals. Now, what would be the size of your workforce would you need to maintain 11,000 animals? It's a lot. It's a lot. And somebody had to pay for that, right? So, again, Job was a very wealthy man, okay? Now, compared to Abraham, because the Bible describes Abraham's work or his wealth. Abraham was also described as extremely wealthy with livestock, silver, and gold. Now, Job's wealth was described a little differently. He was described as the greatest of all the men of the East. And what's interesting is when you compare Job and Abraham, who are both thought to, obviously Abraham we know existed in the patriarchal age. Job we suspect could have been in the patriarchal age. Job's wealth was described as greatest man of the East, and this is to say that Abraham's wealth, silver, gold, livestock, it was more tailored to his nomadic lifestyle. Abraham traveled a lot. Job didn't, at least according to the book of Job. Contrary, in fact, Job seemed to be a little bit more stationary. perhaps maybe even been a sheik of some kind, or some type of regional authority. But I guess we can speculate, but the important thing to get here is both men feared God and both was very well respected. Verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now, that is a lot. Those 6 verses, man. Let's get through it. So there's a few things we need to highlight here. Number one, what does or who are the sons of God that they're talking about? Okay. Now, this is a very important fundamental point to understand. Who we're talking about here in the story. So there are several sons of God references in the Bible. I'm not going to read them all, but the first one is Genesis 6, 1 through 4. And I will read this one. We'll read a couple of them. So, Genesis 6, 1 through 4, references sons of God. Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, the daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were beautiful, and they took them wives for themselves, all of whom they chose. The Lord said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. And there were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were mighty men who were of old, men of renown." Okay, so that's the first reference. Second reference is actually in Job. Job 38:7. And I'll just click that right quick because I'm already in Job. 38:7 says, "When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy." Okay, so who are we talking about? I mean, it's pretty clear to me, angels. Okay, sons of God are in fact angels. So basically what we're saying here, understanding that fact, if you read it differently, it says, "Now there was a day when the angels of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came among them." Okay, so what does present yourself mean? What does present yourself mean? We're obviously not talking about like a runway situation where, angels are walking down, guys like, "Yeah, I like the wings. That's right. I like that's sweet." That's not what they're doing there. Presenting themselves. What does present themselves mean? And again, this is an important fundamental point. So I will bring in a couple different verses to help tie this up. Okay, Daniel 4:13. Daniel 4:13. And I think what you're going to find is a very interesting picture is getting painted here in Job that most people just read right past. Well, we're definitely not doing that. You guys know me better than that. So Daniel 4:13 says, now this is about Nebuchadnezzar, which you guys remember him from Daniel. And it says, "I saw in the visions of my head while on my bed, and there was a watcher, a holy one coming down from heaven, and he cried aloud and said thus. And then it goes into the prophecy. And then verse 23 says, this is Daniel's reply, inasmuch as the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from the heaven and saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, believe its stump, roots, etc., etc. And I'm going to go down here a little further. And it says, verse 24, this is the interpretation of the dream, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which is come upon the Lord, the king, upon my Lord, the king. So what we see here is a watcher, okay, which what I'm reading seems to be like some sort of an angel class that Nebuchadnezzar sees in his dream. He doesn't understand the dream. He hits Daniel up. Daniel, you interpreted some dreams for me. I need you to interpret this dream. Daniel comes in the room and he says, all right, yeah, I got you. Praise. Lord gives an interpretation and he describes the dream back to him. And again, these watchers have given a decree. That's what it said. So how can you issue a decree if you don't have any power over anything? If I'm sitting here, low man on the totem pole, and I issue a decree, who am I issuing it to? Nobody. Because I don't run nothing. I'm not in control of anything. So my point is you have to have power or authority or jurisdiction to issue a decree. And the fact that this is Daniel says a decree from the watchers, that means they have some sort of authority. They have some sort of hierarchy. Another example, just so you know, I'm building my case here. Daniel 10, going back to Daniel. Should have just stayed there. Okay, so Daniel 10 through 21. It's a few verses, but we got to read them. Suddenly a hand touched me, which made me tremble on my knees and on the palm of my hands. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak to you and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. While he was speaking this word to me, I stood trembling. Then he said to me, do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard. And I have come because of your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. And behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. For I had been left alone there with the kings of Persia. Okay. So what is he saying there? He's talking about an actual spiritual battle that's happened. He was supposed to come to Daniel with a message from the Most High, right? Daniel petitioned the Lord for interpretation. The Lord said, okay, I'm going to give it to you. So he sends it via messenger. This angel gets ambushed dealing with the prince of Persia, who I assume is a demon of some sort, and he's going to battle with him for 21 days. And basically, it says he was fighting this dude until Michael, who was one of the chief princes. Now, I'm not the smartest player in the world, but if you're a chief, that means you're over something, which would mean that there's a hierarchy to this thing. Some angels are over other angels or over other dominions or over other jurisdictions. Right? I mean, you're just getting that from reading this. And the interesting part about it is, if we fast forward this to verse 20, he says, then he said, do you know why I have come to you? And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia. So this angel was saying, all right, look, I gave you the word. Now I got to go back and handle my business. And he says, when I have gone forth, indeed, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you that noted in the scripture of truth, no one upholds me against these except Michael, your prince. Okay, so what he's saying is that he's in a fight with the prince of Persia, which happens to be the empire at that time. And then after the Persian Empire was what? Greece. And he just made reference that there's a prince to that. So does that mean that there's princes in all the kingdoms today? I don't know. But what it tells you is that there is a hierarchy in heaven. And there are certain angels that are above other angels. And the point of what's going on here in the initial part of Job, swinging it back to Job, is that these angels have to give an account or present themselves before God over what he has given them authority over. That's what's happening in this scene. And Satan was among them. And so what I find interesting there is that Satan, just like these other angels, also has to give an account of what he has dominion over. So the theory of Satan is just hanging out in hell and God is in heaven. Well, Job in the first 12 verses just basically takes that theory and runs over it. Because that's not what he's describing here. He's saying that basically the sons of God, the angels, were presenting themselves. They had a meeting. God had called the meeting State of the Union. And these angels were, yep, this is happening, here we are, here, here's going on here. And Satan had to give an account also. Satan was among them. So, again, the interesting part about this, well, more interesting if you can say that, where is this meeting happening? Bible doesn't say. It could be on earth. It could be in heaven. But remember, not just Satan is there. He's among all these angels. So he could be in heaven, giving an account. And what's interesting is that couple things. Number one, Satan is confirmed by Jesus Christ to be the ruler of this world. And there's several instances where he confirms that. And I don't have time to read them because I've already rambled on enough. But I will give them to you in your notes. Those verses are John 12:31, where Jesus says he's the ruler of this world will be cast out. John 14:30, which says the ruler of this world is coming and has nothing in me. This is Jesus talking. And then John 16:11, which says the ruler of this world will be judged. Okay? And if that isn't enough, you can take that, put that there, and then flip to Matthew 4:1 through 11, which I won't read because I don't have time also. But in Matthew 4:1 through 11, what's happening there is that Satan is tempting Jesus. And you guys know the story. He tempts him. He says, he says, you know what? If you're truly the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. Now, Jesus is hungry. Clearly, he wants to eat. It's been 40 days since he's done it. So he's clearly hungry. No, he doesn't do it. But what's interesting is in one of the temptations, he says, I will give you all the kingdoms of this world if you bow down and worship me. Now that's what Satan says to Jesus. And what's interesting is Jesus' response. Jesus doesn't say, no, this ain't yours to give. He doesn't say that. He doesn't respond like that. He responds, you shall only worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. That's how he responds. Well, he clearly took Satan's ask or his temptation seriously. Because if Satan didn't have it and it wasn't his, then Jesus wouldn't have acknowledged that and it wouldn't have been a temptation. So my point is clearly Satan is the ruler of this world. And in those sets of verses in Job, it appears to me that he has to give an account of his realm of authority, which is earth, similar to the angels. Despite earth obviously being Satan's realm and being in open rebellion against God. But my point is this puts things in a much different perspective, especially when you fast forward to an unknown date in the future and this happens. Revelation 12, 7 through 13. I'll read this one. So you're looking in Job and you're saying, okay, sons of God, angels, Satan, They're presenting themselves to God, basically giving them an account of their realm of authority, which is what presenting to me means. But then this happens. Revelations 12:7. And a war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. Now the dragon is Satan, a reference to Satan in this case. But they did not prevail, nor was there a place found for them in heaven any longer. What does that mean? That means at some point God says, I'm tired of listening to it, you can't be here. So, verse 9, the great dragon was cast out. That serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world, he was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down. You see that story? You can see the throne room. There's angels going back and forth, giving an account before the white throne of God, where the Most High is seated. And he's listening to the accounts of what's going on within their authority of all these angels. And Satan is coming up there. And God's going, hey, so what's going down with earth, my man? And he's just, oh, no, Javon Blackwell, he was doing this and that. And, I told you he needs to be condemned and all that. And then Jesus is hanging out as my defense attorney going, no, his blood covers me. Say, oh, no, man, now come on now. You can't keep doing that. This guy is a sinner. Now, the law says the wages of sin is death. It's a throne room scene. And these verses show the end of it, which hasn't happened yet. And how do we know that? I'll keep reading. For the accuser of our brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they did not love their lives to death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. So, don't have time to chase those rabbits. There's about 8 of them there. My point is that unless you understood this Job piece, that part I just read here in Revelation, right over your head. You would have never got it. Understanding that the background in Genesis got us there. Genesis 6:1. Then Job makes mention of it and gives us a little period of insight along that timeline of earth, right? And then you fast forward to Daniel, and then some things happen in Daniel that kind of shed this piece of light on it. And then fast forward all the way to the end, almost the end of the age, to Revelation. But again, you wouldn't know what you were reading if you couldn't connect the dots. Back to Job. So God has built a hedge around Job and not allowed Satan to persecute him. Now, what's interesting I find with this is that this confirms 2 separate things. One, God's willingness to protect us. Confirms it. From all of our enemies, including Satan, our chief adversary. It also says that God has ultimate control. And if he does not permit things to happen, they won't happen. Despite the world being under Satan's dominion, which we as mankind gave to him. Don't even get me started. Can't chase that rabbit either. So, these first 12 verses describe a debate in heaven, we suspect. In the throne room, we suspect. Where God is sitting on the throne and he's going, hey, Satan, what's going on, man? Where you been? Just been going to and fro on the earth. Have you considered my servant Job? Yeah, I know Job, but here's the thing, right? So the only reason why Job does this is because you protect him. If you didn't protect him, he'd curse you for sure. There's no question about it. God goes, I'll take that bet. Okay. Tell you what, you can touch everything he has, but you cannot touch the man. Again, things happening in the spiritual world, manifesting themselves in the physical world. And that's where Ephesians 6:12 comes in again. We wrestle not, right? Not against flesh and blood. But again, if you didn't understand this Job piece, crickets on that part. So I want you to kind of understand as we're going through it, how the Bible is piecing itself together and proving itself against everything, right? All right, Job 13. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And the messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them when the Sabeans raided them and took them away. And indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, another also came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, also another came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels and took them away, yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, I got to pause there. Dude, you imagine that? You're kind of sitting out on your porch, and then one of your boys comes up and he's like, hey, man, just wanted to let you know, man, your investment portfolio, yeah, you've lost everything. Wait, what? Yeah, man, you know that Roth IRA you had? Yeah, it's gone, man. Stock market's crashed. And before he can get crashed out of his mouth, one of your other homies shows up and they go, hey, man, just wanted to let you know your son was in a bad car accident. Now he's gone. What? And then you got another servant that rolls up and says, hey, the IRS is coming to take your house. What do you mean? Yeah, there's a misunderstanding apparently, and they're coming to get you. All of these things just like that. I mean, Job has got to be just going, what in the world is going on? Verse 18, while he was still speaking, another also came. Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Whew. Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and he fell on the ground and worshipped and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong. Yeah. Yeah. So essentially in these verses, chapter 1 ends with Satan doing work. I mean, this guy is hitting Job from all angles. Takes away all his material possessions, all of his wealth, his livestock, killed or stolen. All of his servants, which will more than likely have been, he obviously knew him at some point. It could have been his friends, right? Dead. Then on top of that, all his children, all 10 of them. It ain't like he lost 1 or 2. He lost all of them. Dead. That's horrific. For one man to go through all of this in one lifetime seems unfair. I mean, it's like, man, it is unfair. It's so horrific. But at the same time, it's what happened to him. And in all that, he just says, hey, naked I came from my mother's womb. I came in this world with nothing. I'm going to leave with nothing. The Lord gave it to me. The Lord can take it away. Blessed is the name of the Lord. I mean, how many times do things bad happen to us and we say, yeah, it's God's fault. If God was God, why would he let all of these things happen? I listen to a ton of people say that, right? Christians even will say, well, if God is a just God, these things wouldn't happen. If God was a God of mercy, this stuff wouldn't happen. I can't believe that baby was killed. Or I can't believe that, that son, that daughter, that cousin, that whatever. If God was a God of mercy, why did a hurricane hit our house and destroy it? Whenever there is horrific adversity, there's an opportunity to blame God. It's an opportunity to blame God. Or there's also an opportunity to show your faith. And it's easier said than done. There's no question about it. And to be honest with you, if I'm keeping it 100, that's one of the reasons why some of us may not have exactly what we want in life. Because he knows that we'll worship it. We'll put it above him. And so he only gives us what we can handle. So he's like, yeah, JB, I can't give JB $1 million. Because he'll do everything under the sun. He'll worship it. He'll put all of those things above me. I won't get no time, no attention. So I can't trust him with it. So I'm not going to give it to him. Because the ultimate goal in this life is not to be rich. It's to get to the next life. This life is 80, 90, 100 years, 70, 80, 90, 100 years. That's it. The next one is eternity. So when you put it in that perspective, dude, you could give me more money than I could possibly spend. The fact that I'm going to only have 80-ish years to spend it, it's like, what is that? 80 years is nothing compared to eternity. So again, the mission in this life is to get to the next one. And the only way you get there is through accepting Jesus Christ and understanding that his grace alone is what saves you. And you put your faith in that grace. That's what gets you to the next one. Otherwise, you got Satan hanging out in heaven, right? Accusing you, accusing me. Yeah, man, JB, I seen him. He was cussing up a storm 5 years ago, man. I heard him. He hit his finger in the door and he's swearing up and down, Lord, wages of sin, death. He hasn't claimed the blood. He doesn't believe like that. You got to kill this one. That's what's going on right now. And Job's in the thick of it. So next week we're going to talk about, I'm going to try to get through the next 3-4 chapters. Wanted to give you guys the background. There are some fascinating things at the beginning of Job. I wanted to tie in these other verses because as you continue to study the Old Testament and you refer back into Revelation, you end up putting the pieces together. And you end up studying the end of the Bible just by studying the beginning. Then you have perspective and you understand what's going on. So that's the reason why I thought it was valuable to tie that in. As always, I encourage you guys, listen, man, fact check me. Okay? Read the word. Fact check me. Say, no, JB, I don't read that. I don't see that. That's what I see when I read those words. So, that's all I got. Next week, you're going to see it gets a lot worse for our man Job before it gets better. Any questions? Thank you for watching, and may the Lord watch between me and thee while we're absent one from another.